So before we're starting, we're checking as always if we have cut and fused all pattern pieces as they instructed in the instructions. And if you're going for the view A, meaning the quilted pattern piece, make sure that you have cut the pattern piece a little bit bigger, so that when it probably pulls together while quilting, that you can cut it in the right size afterwards. You will also need the Chicago screws, a closure of your choice, and 2 D-rings that are wide enough to attach a strap at the end. Optional also a label that you will prepare to sew on the inside pocket. I have built my sewing tutorial for the JUNO bag as you will find it in the instructions, so I will do it step by step. I will try to cover every single step for the different views, so if you're not doing one step, just please skip to the next point. For preparing the quilt template, you will need a heat erasable pen. Usually those are those that you can also erase with this rubber piece at the back. Please pre-check with your iron if it's one of those that is heat erasable, because those come in really handy. They mark well on the fabric, and if you just press once, they're gone. On the other hand, you can use the usual chalk or one of those textile markers that is washable or also heat erasable. Further on, you will need an awl to piece through the pattern piece so that you can mark all the single dots and connect the lines afterwards as shown in the instructions. Before we start to mark anything on the fabric, we start to prepare the paper pattern by piercing through the tips of each of those triangles. After pre-punching all the holes, you will mark through the holes all the tips of your triangle onto the fabric. And after finishing the middle dots, you will continue to mark each end of each line all around the template. When you have finished all the way around the whole template, you will take off the paper pattern and connect the dots and create the same pattern that you see on the paper by connecting those dots. After finishing drawing those lines by connecting all the dots, please make sure to double check with a measure if your centered dots are all lying on one line. This is important because if they are kind of moving around, you won't have a nice quilted pattern at the end. So now we're off to sewing. I quickly show you how to do it. You will start at one end of your line, then you will sew to the tip of it. You will sink your needle into the fabric and pivot the fabric there. This will look like this, and then you will continue sewing. For sure, you will move back and forth with your thread at the beginning and the end, so you lock your seam, and you will do this for all of those corners and also for those single lines that you have at your pocket flap. Afterwards, give it a good press and cut it into the right size using your paper pattern piece. Now you've finished quilting your back piece and you can now put it aside. I think it's a really cute thing. You can also for sure add whatever quilting pattern you like to. You can do crisscross, you can do checks, you can do whatever you feel like to. This template is included in the sewing pattern, but do whatever you like to. You can now put it aside to go to the next step. So next would be preparing the closer extension, and also this means that you attach one side of your closer to the closer extension. So I will show you how to do it with a magnet. Even I don't do the closer extension in my final version that you will be guided through. So, but I show you now how to do it so that you can do it on your own as well. So you cut and prepare your pattern pieces and your fabric as for all other pattern pieces. You will fuse them, and if you have a pattern on your fabric, make sure that you have a good pattern placement. And then you also have to transfer the center X mark from your lining pattern piece onto your lining. This is important because this is where your closure is centered. So what you have to take care of is that this line that you will use as a guidance to place your closure needs to be parallel to the top line. So this is because if you have a little bit wonky or twisted into one direction turned, this will also make your closure turned. So you will take both your pattern pieces for the main fabric and the lining and put them wrong sides together. Make sure that the edges are really lining up nicely. Your lining pattern piece is slightly smaller than the main fabric, so make sure that the edges really line up nicely, and this will help you to have a nice look of the closer extension, because the lining will slightly pull the main fabric to the back side of the closer extension, which gives it a clean look because you won't see the lining. In general, when sewing bags or sturdier fabrics, I highly recommend to get grip of some fabric clips. They're really helpful because they have really strong power that will keep your pattern pieces in place, and that will help you to have a good and carefree sew. Also, it will help you with like sturdier fabrics, or if you have a thick interfacing fuse to your fabric, that your needles don't bend and break. After pinning your pieces nicely together, you will sew with a general seam allowance for this sewing pattern of 1/4 inch or 0.7 centimeters along the curved edge. This edge remains open, and after sewing you will clip back the seam allowance to 3 millimeters and turn it inside out. After turning the right side to the outside, you will nicely press the edges flat so that they have a really nice curve. Make sure that if you use the heat erasing pan that you don't iron over the mark, because otherwise it will be gone. Now we're already at installing the first element of your closure. I will show it with a magnet here because this is how I did it in the instructions. So you have this magnet, and one piece of it is a little bit thicker here, and the other part has the hole where they go into one and another. And I always use the thinner one with the thicker middle part to put into the closure flap. So with it, there comes this metal plate called a washer, and you will use it to mark where to cut open the lining to insert the prongs. The prongs are those little pieces that will be pressed to the inside after inserting them, and that will keep the magnet in place. Now we're sewing the lining for your bag, and to start, we start with the inside pocket, so you can put aside all other pattern pieces. To sew the inside pocket, you place the pattern pieces right sides facing, so you're facing the wrong side now, and you sew along the side, the top edge and the other side. The bottom edge can remain open. Cut back the corners before you turn the pocket. After turning your pocket, make sure that you press the edges well and that you form nicely the corners. And if you want to attach a label to your inside pocket, make sure that you have it centered and in the desired distance to your top edge. Place your inside pocket on the back of your bag, that you have the center notches on the bottom edge matching, and then you sew it with a edge presser foot onto the back piece of your bag. After sewing the inside pocket to the back, make sure that you close the remaining open edge by sewing a straight line within the seam allowance. So now it's important that you transferred all marks to your pattern pieces. I prefer to put it to the back of my pattern pieces because that's the side that I see when I'm sewing. So I transferred all the dots in the corners to my side panels, also to the back and so on. So everywhere where you have those dots, please transfer them. You need them. And what's now important is that usually you're used to sewing all across the edge, but this time with my sewing pattern, please only sew in between the dots. This is important that your sewing allowance remains unsewn because it makes it very smooth to sew together all the pieces, and you will have very precise corners. Then you're taking your bottom pattern piece, your base panel, and you also need those markings here, and you will pin it or clip it to the bottom edge of your side panels and sew together right sides facing in between those dots on both sides. And afterwards you do the same, sewing it to the back of your lining. So you also clip or pin together and sew in between the dots. You can see now why it is a very nice move to leave the seam allowance unsewn. By doing so, you can form those really nice and neat and sharp corners, because you can move the seam allowance while sewing freely around, which means it doesn't get caught in the other seams. And from the inside, you have this really precise 90-degree angled corner. Afterwards, you add the front side in the same manner to your lining as you did with the other panels. So you clip it or pin it to the side panels and sew in between the dots, the markings, and afterwards you sew the bottom line the bottom seam in the same manner. One small note that I forgot before you put away your lining. If you are not doing a closure extension, but you want to do a magnet closure, you have to place it on the lining now. Please make sure that you have enough distance to the top flap edge, but also have it centered from the sides. So somewhere here, and you have to install it now before you sew the flaps later on. Your lining is finished and we can put it aside and focus on preparing the outer bag. So you don't need it now, just put it aside. So sewing the outer bag is basically the same as when you sewed the lining. It's the same procedure. You first add the side panels, sew in between the dots, then you add the base panel, also sew in between the dots first, so to the side panels, then to the back of your, to the bottom of your bag. Afterwards you add the front, and yeah, it's basically the same procedure. I don't show every single step of those already shown steps with the lining again, because this would be a little bit boring, but I will prepare it and then we get back to how we proceed afterwards. After assembling all the main fabric pieces for the outside pocket, please make sure to double check if you have pressed the seam allowance for your front piece to the inside as well, as same with the lining, and folded it upwards again. For sewing together the outer shell and the inner shell of your bag, you have to turn the lining inside out so that the right side of your fabric is facing you and all the fused interfacing is on the inside of your lining. Then you will shove it into the bag, the outside bag, and make sure that all your corners and all your edges align nicely. When you have aligned all edges nicely and all seams nicely, you can pin or clip together the layers, and you will start sewing all the way around on one side of your front piece. I prefer to start on the right side, 5 centimeters next to the side seam. It's just the main reason why I start on this side is that I like to have as less fabric as possible under my machine when sewing, and this way you can sew nicely around all the edges without having the whole bag under the machine, and you don't have to move too much stuff there. When you finish, you just make sure that you stick to the seam allowance nicely, also in those corners here. Make sure that you sew it like this, but in the front it's easier if you fold it opposite directions. In the back, I repeat, fold it to the same direction. You will arrive on the other side of your front, sew 5 centimeters into it, and sew nicely back and forth so that your thread does not open when turning later. Now to clipping the corners, I already prepared one side to show you. To clip the flap corners, it's nothing special. You have done this several times in your life. It's just clipping. Just make sure that you don't get too close, because otherwise your corners might have the tendency to fray later on when wearing and using the bag. But clipping into those corners is a little bit, yeah, you have to pay attention to do it in the right way. It's important to do so, because otherwise, if you have your fabric turned, your lining might have the tendency to create folds in here. So you really need to clip in the corner in a 45-degree angle through all layers, and you have to end really right before the seam. So make sure that you do it properly and that you have no pulling in the lining afterwards. Also, make sure don't hurt your seam. So you have to be precise, but at the same time careful. So now we're already turning the back inside out. You would just move inside the layers through the opening, and I always find it the easiest if I grab the flap and just pull it through and start to form the corners already nicely, and then I pull through the rest and give it a good press afterwards and make sure that all edges and all corners are really nicely angled and pressed. Now it's pretty visible what a difference a good press makes. When turning the back inside out, sometimes the lining gets detached from the facing and it looks a little bit, yeah, wrinkly and not nice at all. And when you had a good press, it's really a nice finish. Talking about finish, you will, when you're done installing all the closures and everything, you will sew shut the front with a edge stitch presser foot with a narrow seam to the top edge. So to have it all nicely in the same manner all around, I can recommend to you, you don't have to, by the way, it's not obligatory. So if you have leather or something, or you feel like your fabric will not take part in this procedure nicely, just skip it. But I will sew all around the edges here from one side to the other side, and the front still remains open, please. First step before you start installing your closure is that you draw this to the side panel's parallel line at the center of your front piece. This is really important because this is your guidance where to place your closure piece. To draw this, I again use this Pilot fixed iron ball pen. It's the one that is erasable usually. It's used by primary school kids, but it's perfect for drawing on fabric, as I introduced already at the beginning of the video. So let's start with the counterpart of the magnet closure. You have already, if you went for the magnet, you already installed it either on the closure extension or on the flap lining part, as I instructed before, earlier. And now you just need to figure out where to place the counterpart. So you fold in the sides, you will fix them later with the screws, and figure out how you want the placement of your flap. So you fold it as if it already has the closure installed. If you have the extension, it will look like this. And then you figure out where to place the other side of the magnet. So you will place your washer there, unfold, take your pen and mark through the holes where to open the fabric. Very important, only open on the main fabric, the lining remains untouched. So then you will push through the prongs at the marked and open spots, and you will pull in, fold in the prongs to the inside. Make sure that they are lying flat. Yeah, and that's it. Oh, don't forget to, before you fold them to the inside, to push the washer over the prongs. Yeah. For the push closure, it's basically the same system, but with the upper part of the closure is a little bit different. These usually have to be screwed to the flap. So you will place it centered at the edge of the flap. Not sure if this is fully centered, I will just show in theory. I will install it later on and you can watch along, but I just do a quick introduction to how to do it. So you place it, then you will take your awl and perforate at the holes where the screws need to go through. So it's important that you perforate all through the flap. Not just the lining, not just the main, but through all layers, and then you just screw it to the fabric. Yeah. For the bottom piece of your closure, it's basically the same as installing for the magnet closure. So you will fold over your flap after folding in the side, and you will determine where to place your bottom part. It's important that you close your closure for that, so that you have the real distance for the finished closure, and then you will place the prongs centered around the line on your front piece. This is important because if you move it sidewards and it's not centered, you will have the problem that your flap later on will sit like this and would not look nice. Then you can open it again, and you take your washer. It's not here now, but you will have a mark here somewhere, and you will take your washer and place it exactly parallel to the line on your front piece, and determine where to put the second mark. It's important that you have it really parallel, as I said, otherwise your flap will be wonky on your pocket and you don't want it. Yeah, when you have the second mark, you take away the washer, you open it with a seam ripper or with scissors, as you desire. Just make sure not to open too much of it. Make a small opening, and then you will pull through the prongs, push it through the main fabric. Remember, the lining remains untouched, so don't open anything in the lining. It's just about the main, because you want to have the prongs in between the layers. Then you push it through. The washer goes over the prongs inside the bag, and you will push the prongs to the inside. Yeah, and that's it. The third kind of closure I introduced in my sewing pattern for an option, so is the turn lock closure. So you have this piece with a hole, you push the another piece through, you can turn it and it's locked. So for this one, this means that you have to cut off a bigger piece from your fabric. So you need to place it centered, draw the form that you need to cut out, and you have to be really precise with this. If your hole is too small, your fabric will peek through on the inside of your closure piece. And if you cut it way too big, the closure will move and won't sit snug in your fabric. If you have planned to do the closure extensions, it's the same procedure. After cutting out, you will unscrew the both of the pieces and you will put them on the right side of your flap. So you have the nice side that will get on the right side of your flap, and the part where your screws will get screwed into, this will be on your lining side. So make sure that you put it right. Yeah, and then you will sandwich the hole in between and screw it together again. So your fabric will be sandwiched in between those pieces. To install the counterpart at the front of your bag, it's basically the same procedure as with all other closures. There is no big difference when it comes to the part that is placed at the front of the bag. So you have this here, this is screwed here. Just imagine it is screwed to it, and you have this hole. So you will slide your counterpart through the hole so that you have your prongs sticking out on the back of your flap, so you can easily see where you have to place the prong holes on the front of your bag. Make sure that you mark it nicely. If you want to, you can use the washer to have a good placement mark. Make sure that it's really centered and that it's parallel to the sides and to the bottom. And then you will open it just a tiny little bit so you can push through the prongs. You will slide the washer on the prongs inside the 2 layers. Make sure that you don't hurt the lining at all, so the lining remains untouched. And fold the prongs to the inside. Just a small note on the material for the bottom insert. So you either have the option to use a interfacing that is sturdy enough. I have recommended one in the instructions. If you use it 1 layer, 2 layers, I leave it up to you. If you're going for the material that is in those reusable shopping bags, plastic shopping bags, also there is no much discussion on what materials because they always use the same. But if you're trying to create the bottom insert by using folders, I quickly wanted to show you what quality it needs to be. So we have those really thin ones that are quite floppy. Then we have this mid-weight quality, and then we have those heavy-duty ones. They're hard to ruin, but those are the ones that we want to go for. Next step is to close the turning opening. It's quite easy. You just fold in the already pre-pressed seam allowance to the inside in between both of the layers, and then you sew with a edge stitch all along the front top edge. So we reached the final step for this video tutorial, which does not mean that there is nothing more to do. For those who decided to do a chain strap, they are finished after this step. Those who decided to sew their own shoulder strap, please consult the instructions. They are pretty clear. Sewing a shoulder strap is very easy and you don't need any tips and tricks to be successful in it. So I decided to leave it with this for this video tutorial. You will need your Chicago screws. You will need your D-rings, 2 each, and an awl, or what I prefer to use is a hole puncher. Inside your bag you have marked on the lining those 2 dots where you have to push your screw through. So you need to either poke a hole here with your awl or with a punch tool. Then you take your Chicago screws, unscrew them, and you pull through each hole from the lining side 1 part of the screw through the hole. Yeah. Some fabrics are a little bit uncooperative, but you will make it. And then you sandwich your D-ring in between those 2 screws and screw together.